This is Sunil Agrawala here. Yeah, we will get started. I welcome all of you to this webinar from Knowledgehut. This webinar, I think topic we are looking at is like trying to understand what changes have happened in PMBOK Sixth Edition in comparison to PMBOK Edition 5. I think that's the subject for this webinar for us. As I said, I'm Sunil Agrawala, and I'm coming here as like I'm a PMP. I think just to kind of quickly give a background about myself, so that all of you kind of relate with me. I think in terms of knowing PMI practices and PMP trainings and doing project management, doing trainings, consulting on project management. So I've been doing it for last 25 years. So I'm just doing quickly doing a self-introduction. I'm sure you might have been given a brief profile about me. Okay, so yeah, I think the way we would go about this webinar, I'll take you through a broad understanding of the changes that has happened from PMBOK Edition 5 to PMBOK Edition 6 at a broader level. I'll take you through that, and then we also try to kind of understand how does this impact some of you who might already be a PMP. So how does it impact you? Some of you might be looking at taking the PMP examination, and some of you would have already taken a training based on PMBOK Edition 5. So we're just looking at people like, I think with this background in this webinar, so where basic idea is to kind of compare and then see the changes. And then the next part would be, hey, so can we, if you're already conversant with PMBOK Edition 5, maybe you would have taken a training earlier based on that, or you might already be a PMP. So understanding the changes quickly, and especially for people who would be kind of looking forward taking the PMP test maybe in coming months. So how you can quickly kind of ramp up your understanding about the changes without really kind of feeling overwhelmed with the changes, because I think when a new edition comes, I'm sure all of us a lot of anxiety. So how much changes have happened. So idea here is I'll just give you a good top-down structural changes. So I think that should make all of you feel comfortable from a top-down approach, understanding the changes, and then maybe we take things forward from there. Yeah, as the title suggests, so it's more like we're trying to look at a bridge between PMBOK 5 and PMBOK 6. So that's the reference here. So I'll just quickly take you through a little quick history background. So PMI has, I think the first edition of PMBOK was published in 1996. You can see this here. And then PMI always continuously is working with the PMPs, with the industry, with the sole intention of making the PMBOK guide much more relevant, much more meaningful for the industry. I think writing a guideline on project management, it's really takes a lot of effort. And then the number two, it must get accepted. It must make sense. It must appeal to all different kinds of project managers, and it must be relevant for all different kinds of projects that we do in the industry. So with that intention to keep it relevant, keep it up to date, and keep it much more meaningful. So they continuously keep on evolving. So they work closely with the industry folks and try to make it more relevant. So we have been seeing an evolution in the PMBOK guide almost every 4 to 5 years. I think typically that's the average timeline where PMI has been coming up with a new updated edition of PMBOK. And the latest edition, I think the 5th edition was published in 2013, and then the latest edition, which is the 6th edition, it got published in September 2017. And today the PMP exam is based on now 6th edition of PMBOK. Now when this evolution is happening, I'm sure, like I wrote my examination, PMP examination, based on edition 2000. So that was way back in 2003. Today we are talking about the 6th edition, and then some of you would have already gone through 5th edition. So it's very important for us to kind of quickly understand, hey, so how much things are changing and what exactly is changing in PMBOK guide. If I have to put this in my way, I think the basic philosophical understanding of project management, the concepts of project management, the core of project management, I think that still remains intact. But then the way it should be presented in a formal way so that it will make more sense. That's number one. And number two, also adding any new good practices, I think, which comes from the industry. So that is also very important, that we must keep adding any new development in project management, any new practices in project management, any new thought process in project management in the newer edition of PMBOK. So one thing, let's try to understand, and what I would like to convey here is the basic heart and soul of project PMBOK guide. I think that remains same. The understanding remains same. That's really not changing so much. But then the way it is presented, the wrapper, I think that's where we are seeing some changes in all these editions. So I think with this background, let me take you to the next step, where we would try to see at a broad level what all have changed in 6th edition. And let me again repeat here, I think all this comparison is against this 5th edition of PMBOK. And somewhere we are assuming, I hope that, I think you are already conversant with 5th edition, somewhere you would have seen that. So I think at a broader level, what has not changed is the heart and soul, the philosophy of project management, that is still intact. And what has also not changed is, if you would be aware, the 10 knowledge areas and 5 process groups, I think that still remains intact. But then in the 6th edition, if you compare this with 5th edition, there are some structural changes they have made. And whatever changes they have made, I think that has really made 6th edition look much better. Maybe it appears much more rule-based now. If some of you would have read PMBOK 5th edition, some of you would have gone through a PMP training, PMP preparation training in the past. I think one of the biggest challenges, I think, that all of us we face is understanding all the processes of project management. So for example, till 5th edition of PMBOK, we had 47 processes of project management. That is how the 5th edition was defined. And today what we have is 49 processes. So maybe some processes added and maybe some process got deleted. But the bigger challenge here is, I think every process has got a lot of inputs, a lot of outputs, a lot of tools and technique. I think that is how all these processes have been defined in PMBOK guide. I mean, right from the 1st edition itself. And that's like one of the major challenges, because we all need to understand those processes very well, how it has been defined and how the inputs, why these inputs and why these outputs and why these tools and technique. And especially for the examination purpose, we have to really understand and remember all these tools and technique also. And that has been always probably one of the most overwhelming aspect while someone would be going through the preparation of towards the PMP certification exam. But in 6th edition, I think they have tried PMI. I think one of the major objective in 6th edition has been trying to make the inputs, the tools and techniques, and the outputs of all the 49 processes. Today what we have is 49 processes. Look more rule-based rather than seeming very ad hoc. So that is one effort they have tried to make it. I'll just explain you what's the scope of change that has happened. So I think what we are going to look at here is, first we'll start with understanding the scope of changes in PMBOK 6th edition, and then quickly we'll try to look at some of the rules at a higher level for the inputs and outputs which they've defined. As I said, they're trying to make it more rule-based, try to make it look more consistent and much more logical. Rules for handling tools and techniques. So again, there are some changes that has happened. And project management plan, I think that's like one of the major plan, a document that we prepare, which contains all the, which is kind of an integrated plan, which includes my project scope detail, my project schedule, my project cost, my project quality plans. All those plans we make and put together and make a plan. So some changes in rules there also to make it again look a little more consistent, a little more meaningful. And then after that, we'll also try to kind of understand quickly what are the changes that has happened maybe in, so there are 3 chapters in PMBOK, the initial first 3 chapters in 5th edition, and now also we have initial 3 chapters which really don't talk about the real project management processes, but it contains some background, foundational, basic information, some definitions and all that. So some changes have happened in the first 3 chapters also, so we'll try to look at that. And then after that, we'll try to understand the overall changes in the knowledge areas and the processes. So as I said, knowledge area number still remains same, 10, and the process group still remain same, 5. When I say process group, it's like initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, and closing. These are the 5 process groups, and it has been there. 5 process groups have really never changed. But then the knowledge area, I think in 5th edition what we had was 10 knowledge area, so it is still 10 knowledge area in 6th edition. But then there are some changes in the naming of some of the knowledge areas and naming of some of the processes that has happened, so we'll try to understand that. Plus, I think in PMBOK 6th edition, what they have done is, for every chapter, for every knowledge area, there are 10 knowledge areas. That is how PMBOK is structured, knowledge area wise. So what they have done is, for every knowledge area, they have dedicated some initial information. So what they call them as front material for all the knowledge areas. So every knowledge area, so maybe there are some 1 to 3 pages of information which talks about some of the trends, some of the concepts, leading concepts. I think just to summarize and make and kind of provide the latest information, the latest thought process for that knowledge area that is existing in the industry. So this is one common new thing they have added. And then in every knowledge area, they also have added a small portion on Agile. So when I say Agile, now Agile as a method of development has really become very popular. Traditionally, I think we have been thinking mostly as waterfall model, but now today, especially in software, Agile has really kind of picked up, and Agile is being used in many software development projects. So what they have done is, they have also made a small mention about Agile in every knowledge area and maybe in every process. Hey, so if you're using Agile method, so is there any special consideration you may have to take? But then the expectation is not that as a PMP, as a project manager, I need to be an expert in Agile. I think that's one, a lot of time people have been asking this query. So there are 2 different body of knowledge. One is project management body of knowledge, and then the other one is the Agile body of knowledge. And by the way, PMI never had their own body of knowledge on Agile, but now with the 6th edition, they also published their own body of knowledge for Agile. But here the expectation is, someone who is taking the PMP examination is definitely not that you have to be an expert in Agile again. But then the expectation would be, you must know what is Agile, and which I think we knew earlier also, but here they are making a special mention everywhere. But I think not to kind of really get I think intimidated that, hey, a lot of time people say, do I really need to understand everything about Agile if I have to write PMP exam? No, answer is no. So these are the broad, I think, changes that has happened. Some rules for the inputs and outputs, some rules for tools and techniques. I think this is the main core of the processes. Some rules, changes for project management plan, and some changes in the first 3 chapters of PMBOK guide, plus changes overall in the processes, number of processes and knowledge areas. We'll see that. And as I mentioned, these 2 things are being mentioned for every knowledge area. So this is like at a broader level, if you try to understand the changes from a top-down approach. So this is what is there. So let me take you to the next step. And I think if you get a chance to refer to PMBOK Guide 6th edition, towards the end of PMBOK Guide, they have explained very clearly what is the scope of the change in this latest edition of PMBOK. So as I already mentioned, I think the focus is like continuously try to keep the PMBOK Guide much more relevant. So a few things like review, interpret, ensure appropriate alignment with the standard which is being followed for project management, and then some sort of harmonization with any other relevant PMI foundational standards. So PMI has got, apart from PMBOK Guide, there are some other foundational standards also. So it's like making sure that the other standards of from PMI and PMBOK, I mean, they're all in sync. So that's another objective of the changes. And PMI time to time conducts a study in the industry, what they call as the project manager role delineation study. So this study, basically the main objective is to kind of try to develop a common consensus about the role of a project manager, about the responsibilities of a project manager, and about the skill sets required, expected from a project manager. I think what I just mentioned here, these three things, the role of a PM, the responsibilities, associated responsibilities of a PM, and the skill set required or expected from a PM. I think there has been a lot of diverse views on this. I think if you just go 20 years back, there has been, based on different industry, if I talk about a construction project manager versus a software project manager versus a project manager in pharmaceutical industry. So we talk about these different kinds of projects, a project manager in automotive industry developing a new product. So there has been a lot of diverse views and expectations. What PMI has been trying to do is reaching out to all this different industry, and in those respective industries domains, what they think should be the role of a project manager, what they think should be the role of a responsibility of a project manager, trying to kind of involve all of them and trying to come up with consolidated and more aligned definition of a project manager's role and responsibility. So they've been trying to do that, so that I think so, making sure that the 6th edition of PMBOK gets aligned with the latest role delineation study which PMI had undertaken. And maybe some other part is like keeping in view some of the new research that has been happening, and then maybe deleting few things also. So it's not that we always add things if they feel that certain things are not relevant, so maybe deleting that, dropping that also. But the most important is the last point. So bring greater consistency and refinement. I think this is true for maybe every new edition that comes up here. Okay, so this is like the kind of the scope of change that has happened. And as I said, I think the changes are broadly in the rules, the handling rules for input and outputs. I think that has been one of the, as I said, one of the most probably difficult, I think, aspect for anyone who would be preparing for the PMP certification. So that's where like so many processes, so many inputs and so many outputs. So let's quickly try to understand again at a broader level what kind of fundamental rules they've tried to bring in here about the inputs and outputs. You can see here we are talking more about the inputs and outputs. So typically they are saying, I think one of the major inputs would be certain documents. So inputs are any documents those are key to a process. So I think when you start seeing the list of inputs, you'd find many of the inputs are documents. So when I say document, a requirement document, a stakeholder register, a risk register, a list of activities, I think these are example of documents. So when we talk about this 47 or 49 processes, here right now we have 49 processes now in 6th edition. So the input list would contain a good amount of list of relevant documents for that process. And what they are saying, the output from a process should become an input to some other process. So today we have 49 processes. So it's not that whatever output we create from a process, it would always be kind of a hanging or a dangling thing. So there's a relationship between these processes. So there are two kinds of inputs. One is to a process, an input can come maybe from outside the project. For example, when we are initiating a new project. So I think the very first step of initiating a new project, I think there is no previous process for the project. So in this case, some of the input documents that would come, for example, would be a business case document or maybe an agreement from the customer. So I think these are the two major documents that would come as an input for us to initiate a new project. Now these two documents, the example that I gave you here, agreement or maybe a business case, these two documents are not prepared as part of the project. These are already prepared before the project has begun. So you will have some inputs which might be coming from outside the project, and then after that I think most of the inputs would be coming from one of the outputs of some of the processes. So that's where, so one output of a process becomes an input for the next process. I think that's what they're just trying to make it more clear here. Yeah, so one more thing we see, as I said, project document. So there are certain project documents which are coming from outside the project, but then there are good number of project documents which will get created within this 49 processes. Now a document would get created for the first time. For example, I'm just assuming that all of you are kind of somewhere familiar with PMBOK Fifth Edition. That's an assumption I'm making here. We have a process called Identify Stakeholder. Now, in Identify Stakeholder, we prepare a document called Stakeholder Register. We have a process called Identify Risk. So in that process, we create a document called a Risk Register. Now, first time when any new document would get created in a new project, so that document would be shown explicitly as an output. So Identify Risk process, if I take the example, would have an output called Risk Register. So that document name would be written very explicitly. But then going forward, in any of the future other processes, if this particular document would be getting updated or will be making some changes, then they will not use the word Risk Register anymore. So Risk Register name as an output would be there only in one process called Identify Risk. But then in future, if this document is going through any changes, they would show that as an output what would read as a project document output. I think that's one I think basic change, so rule they are making here. So I'm just trying to kind of give you some feel of some of the rules. If you talk about, yeah, I think this is explained here. Any document, first time when a new document gets created, it will be shown explicitly as a specific output. Risk Register, Stakeholder Register, Activity List. So these are specific document names. But then later on, if any of the other processes would be updating them, so it will be shown more as a project document update. I think that's one I think basic change, so rule they are making here. So I'm just trying to kind of give you some feel of some of the rules. If you talk about, yeah, I think this is explained here. Any document, first time when a new document gets created, it will be shown explicitly as a specific output. Risk Register, Stakeholder Register, Activity List. So these are specific document names. But then later on, if any of the other processes would be updating them, so it will be shown more as a project document update. So same way, I think project management plan, as I said, is like one most important plan, a comprehensive integrated plan that is being prepared, and almost 24 planning processes are used to prepare an integrated plan for a project, which is the heart and soul of a project, by the way. That's the blueprint for the project. So here again, for project management plan also, they have come up with certain basic rules. So if I have to explain some of these bullet points here, so there are typically, I think we have 10 knowledge areas. So 10 knowledge area, out of 10 knowledge area, there are 9 knowledge areas. For example, scope management, schedule management, cost management, quality management, and so on. So for all of these knowledge areas, actually we create a subsidiary plan. So corresponding subsidiary plan is being created. So whenever a subsidiary plan gets created, which kind of sounds like a plan like a schedule management plan, for example. Now, schedule management plan is a plan which includes all the necessary guidelines for preparing schedule and controlling schedule. Now, this initial guideline called schedule management plan, or maybe another initial guideline called scope management plan, now these are known as the subsidiary plans. So the subsidiary plans, as I just said, these are the guidelines for how to manage things in a particular knowledge area. So whenever we have a process where we create a subsidiary plan, they are saying project charter. Project charter again is a very important document. In fact, that's the first document that gets created for any new project that we initiate. So project charter would have all that initial information about a project. So project charter would always be an input in a process wherever we are creating a subsidiary plan. I'm just trying to explain you, and I don't know, maybe if I can, I really can't show you an example here. So as I said, I'm making an assumption here that all of you have seen PMBOK 5th edition. You don't have to remember everything, but at least whatever reference I'm making, you should be able to relate with that. Yeah, so, and then same way, I think first time when we create a subsidiary plan, it will be shown as an explicit output: schedule management plan, cost management plan, quality management plan, communication management plan, risk management plan. So these are all subsidiary plans. So the process where it gets created for the first time, you would see this as an explicit output. But then going forward, during the planning process, we might be updating some of the subsidiary plans also. So updating any of the subsidiary plans later on would be shown as project management plan updates. So I think we are talking about, you would see these two things very frequently in the outputs: project document updates and project management plan updates. These were there in 5th edition also, and those are there in 6th edition also. That has really not changed, but here at least they are putting the rules now very explicitly. In 5th edition, I think maybe things were really not that clear, so that rules are coming here. And I think it's good if you understand the rules. It'll really become kind of easy when someone would start preparing, reading PMBOK 6th edition, trying to understand, master it, etc. Now some other rules also they have added, what is referred as a sequencing rule. So the sequencing rules again for the inputs and the outputs, because there would be a big list of inputs for every process, and there would also be a big list of outputs for every process. So now earlier, maybe the outputs were, inputs and outputs were not written. I think they were just written, not written in any kind of particular order. But here they're saying, again, it's not in a particular order, but then they have decided a sequence. So to maintain consistency. So what is the sequence? They're saying, if suppose for any project, any process, if project charter would be an input, there are many processes where project charter is an input. So in case project charter is one of the inputs, so in the list of input, project charter would always be written as the number 1 input. Now, number 1 doesn't mean that it's more important. They're just defining a sequence. Now, same way, in many processes, project management plan itself is an input. So if project management plan is an input, it would be listed as the second input for that process. So that's a rule for sequencing they have come up. And then in many processes, project documents would be an input. Now, stakeholder register is a project document. Risk register is a project document. Activity list is a project document. Estimation sheets that we prepare, those are again documents. There are a huge list of project documents. So if some project documents are an input to some of the processes, they would be listed as the third input. But now in 6th edition, they would not write risk register as an input. They would not write stakeholder register as an input, which they used to do till 5th edition. They used to put the specific name of the document, but now in 6th edition, the input would read like project documents. But then project documents, underneath that, in the description section of PMBOK guide, there they would mention very clearly which particular project document would be an input here. So you can see here, there are three standard inputs here. Project charter could be one of the inputs, project management plan could be one of the inputs, and project documents would be the third input. And if all the three are there, then this is the sequence in which they would be written. Project charter first, project management plan second, and documents would be the third input. I think this is one basic rule now that has come up, so which I'm sure would make it easier for all of us to kind of remember things also. And then there are two other inputs, very interesting. If you, again, I'm assuming that all of you have seen some previous PMBOK version, enterprise environmental factor and organizational process assets. I think these were also two very important inputs, and then they are still important inputs. So they would be written only at the end. So now these are 5 common inputs which might be there in many of the processes: project charter, project management plan, then project documents, enterprise environmental factors, and organizational process assets. Now, in addition to them, there might be some other inputs also. For example, agreement. Now, agreement with the customer. If we are doing a project for an external customer, there must be an agreement for us to kind of start working on the project. Now, agreement also could be an input, so they would be listed after project document. Now, business document. So, for example, business case, that is referred as a business document. If that's an input in some of the processes, that would be listed after the third input. So, the first 3 inputs would be your project charter, project management plan, then project documents, followed by, at the end, you have enterprise environmental factor, and at the bottom you have organizational process assets, and then in between you may have some of these additional documents, if at all there are some additional things which are coming as an input here. So if you see this, maybe I'll show you one process, maybe let me show you one process detail here quickly, which might make it look a little more, you can relate maybe. But my assumption still is here. I think that was one of the assumptions for this webinar. I'll just show what I'm trying to convey here. I'm just showing one sample process. So suppose this is a process now in 6th edition. So in this process, project charter actually is not an input, so it is, hence it is not mentioned. But then the next input, as I had said, project management plan, and then project documents, and then at the bottom you see enterprise environmental factor, organizational process assets. In between, if that process requires any other input, so they would be written like this after the project documents. So now there is a consistency. Now you may say that, hey, so what's the big deal? It's really not a big deal in terms of the core understanding, but then I think this definitely could be very helpful when we are trying to really remember and master the input output tools and technique, because now there's a rule here, there's a rationale, there is a logic behind this. So I'm again kind of will come back here to our core. So some rules now, you can see that there are some rules now. Everything they're trying to govern by defining a rule. So let's see a few more rules here. So there are some other changes that has happened with regards to tools and technique. Again, I think if we have 49 processes, and if I kind of assume that there would be an average of 3 to 4 tools and technique, also it kind of really goes up to 200 different tools and technique, maybe possible tools and technique. And then that again becomes very overwhelming, remembering each specific tool and technique. We have to remember, we don't have a choice. Somebody would be kind of going for writing the PMB test. So here again they have tried making things, the tools and technique also look a little more logical, present it more logically. So what they have done is, instead of putting all the tools and technique as unique tools and technique, they have tried to create a generic categories of tools and technique now in 6th edition. So you can see here, for example, data gathering is a tool and technique, and you would see data gathering as a tool and technique in many processes. But then when we say data gathering, it sounds very generic. Under data gathering, we may have very specific tools and technique. For example, brainstorming is a data gathering technique. Interview is a data gathering technique. Focus group is a data gathering technique. So these are examples of data gathering techniques. So where we're trying to get some information about something. Interviews, surveys, focus groups, brainstorming. So till 5th edition, what they used to do, if brainstorming was required to be done, so they used to put the word brainstorming, a focus group. So the list of inputs, list of tools and technique used to look very long. When we see a process definition and the list of tools and technique, so instead of putting specific tool and technique name like brainstorming or focus group or interviews, and there are many more, what they're doing, so in the process table, in the process definition, they're using data gathering as a tool and technique. But then in the description part of PMBOK, that is where they're explaining. So in this case, under data gathering, we'll be using brainstorming as one of the technique, for example. So that is what they have done. So data gathering, data analysis. So data analysis again could include things like, if you kind of relate with 5th edition, variance analysis, trend analysis, reserve analysis, cost benefit analysis. I'm just trying to take some examples here. These are all part now coming under this tool and technique called data analysis. So understanding here is, hey, so we have to do some sort of analysis about the performance, some comparison. So I think all these names fit in here. So in the process definition, they are using the word data analysis, but then in the description section of PMBOK, then they're saying, hey, so in this case, we will need to do cost benefit analysis to understand this. In this case, maybe we need to do a trend analysis or a variance analysis. So I think that original tool and technique names are still there. I think they have not thrown them out. Then what they're trying to do is they're trying to put them under categories, so that I think all the process tools and technique would look much more logical, and hopefully it will become easier for the new reader to kind of really logically comprehend things. And I'm sure that's the purpose here. So this is one major change that has happened in 6th edition of PMBOK. Let me again see if I can show you that particular process, and if that has you can see this kind of tool and technique now. Data analysis is a tool and technique. So you see this as a tool and technique in many processes. Wherever some analysis, a particular analysis is required, this is how you see the name. But then in the description section, they would explain, they have explained. So in this case, we need to do this particular analysis. So now I think, I don't know, I'm sure it's a benefit that when you see the process tables, it looks much more consistent. It looks much more logical. And then that's very important for anyone who try to master this PMBOK guide. I think remembering everything is a huge task. So developing a logical understanding, I'm sure, goes a much longer way in kind of really appreciating what they are trying to convey here. It's a thought process. It's a very logical way of putting things together. So this is one more change that has happened with regards to tools and technique. So effort is to reduce the number of tools and techniques. I think that is what they have tried, and grouping of tools and technique. And under each group, there are number of techniques. I think I already gave some example here. And then there are some unique tools and techniques. Still, everything cannot come under these categories. There are still some ungrouped tools and technique also. I think this is one major change. So I think when you start reading PMBOK guide, this is something all of you will have to kind of understand about each process. So one is like look at this generic tools and technique and then map it with the specific one that is being used. So your knowledge of 5th edition, I think still would be very relevant in 6th edition. So it's not that someone who has gone through a training in 5th edition, I think all that knowledge is completely changing. Maybe there's a wrapper now we are putting on top of those things. I think that's one change that has happened. Some changes with regards to project management plan also. I think if you remember, there are 10 knowledge areas: scope, time, cost, quality. Now we don't call them a time anymore, we call it a schedule. And then we have resources, project resource management, project communication management, risk management, procurement management, and stakeholder management. So if you see, out of these 10 knowledge areas, 9 knowledge areas are the real knowledge areas where we have to kind of really figure out a way, hey, so how we should manage things in this knowledge area. So we have 9 subsidiary plans for each of these 9 knowledge areas, and these 9 subsidiary plans actually becomes part of my overall integrated project management plan. I think that's the understanding. But then there are some additional plans also. Apart from the 9 subsidiary plans, we still may have something called a change management plan. So change management plan would address how changes would be handled in the project. Maybe a configuration management plan. So if any of my deliverable would be changing because of a change, so we need to maintain the history of change in those deliverables. So that is configuration management plan, how it should be done. Performance measurement baseline. So these are again few things which are part of my overall project management plan. A change management plan, a configuration management plan, plus the baselines, and what kind of life cycle we choose for this project. Life cycle would be the set of phases that we define for the project. So this all would be part of your overall project management plan. So what they are saying, that these things, I think what listed here, how reviews would be done, what is the frequency, what are the different kinds of review, what is the development approach we are going to take. These are certain decisions also. Very important decisions are being made, but these decisions are not made in any of the planning processes. These decisions are made finally maybe in a process what we call where we are integrating all the plans. If I have to show something here, I'm just again taking you. I hope this would look familiar to all of you. Again, I'm assuming that you are all kind of already conversant somewhere or at least had seen this process table. This is how the project management processes are grouped. So there's initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, and closing, and then these are the knowledge areas. So here, what I was just trying to explain, planning, when we do planning, so my plan would include the subsidiary plans for each of these knowledge areas. Yeah, okay. So what I was trying to explain here, we have 24 planning processes here. So these 24 planning processes are used to come up with that final integrated plan for the project. So my integrated plan includes planning for these 9 knowledge areas plus some of those additional things. So this additional things, a change management plan, a configuration management plan, a performance measurement baseline. So we create baselines also, project life cycle, development approach. So these decisions are not taken in any of these underlying processes here. So when I say underlying processes, these are the underlying processes. Now those planning decisions, some of those planning decisions are being taken in this process, what we call as develop project management plan, but where we start integrating everything together. So that's one small clarification. I think they have very explicitly they have made now in 6th edition. Yeah, so this, I think this is a change. I know maybe I'm just explaining. I'm hoping that I think with the assumption that all of you kind of had some idea about 5th edition. Yeah, I think these are some changes in terms of rule, what we just saw. So some rules, there are some basic rules defined in the PMBOK about handling inputs and outputs. Some rules again about sequencing the inputs and outputs. Some rules about project management plan, how to create and updates to the plan. And then some changes and rules maybe for handling tools and technique that has come now to make it look more consistent. some changes in the planning process changes also. Yeah, I think that's more about some of the rules at a structural level. And then I think quickly, I think the first 3 chapters of PMBOK guide always have been kind of one of the most important chapters. So where they try to kind of explain why project management and a lot of different definitions and try to create that initial framework for project management. So now there is a change in the first 3 chapters also. Some changes have happened. So what they have done, the section 1, the first chapter, so they have tried to cover, I think, all the introductory information about projects, programs, portfolios. I think all that in the first chapter itself. And they're also talking about the life cycle, different types of life cycle. So for example, waterfall, agile, iterative. So they're discussing briefly about all those life cycles and selection of life cycle. So under what scenario we should be choosing a waterfall or a predictive life cycle, under what scenario we should be choosing an agile or an adaptive life cycle. So those kind of discussions are being covered, all that basic discussions in the first chapter. Plus, I think the most important thing what they have added in first chapter, which typically used to be there in the 3rd chapter till 5th edition. I think that table which I showed you, this process table, and the description of the process, 5 process groups, 10 knowledge areas. There was a dedicated chapter on this, 3rd chapter till 5th edition, but now they have removed this. So now they are simply saying, hey, so now we have this many processes which are grouped into 5 process groups and 10 knowledge areas. So the amount of discussion, maybe I think it was little repetition, maybe little duplication, maybe that was happening, I'm sure. So they've condensed that and they are addressing that now in the first chapter itself. So which earlier maybe we were seeing them in the 3rd chapter. So that is one major change that has happened. The first chapter looks much more complete now, all important information that's been captured. And the 2nd chapter is completely dedicated on something called environment in which the project operates or the influences on a project. So I think this includes all the influences, EEF and OPA, and the structure of the organization, whether it's a functional, projectized, metrics, and how they influence. I think all that is being addressed, all the influences on a project is addressed in section 2, chapter 2. And they have added a completely new chapter. The 3rd chapter is now completely dedicated to defining the role of a project manager, responsibility of a project manager, expectations from a project manager, leadership, managing, all those kind of stuff, the skill set required from a project manager. So now they have, this is not a big knowledge area, but at least they have now tried making it very formal with a dedicated chapter. That's the 3rd chapter, which was not there. This chapter was not like this till 5th edition. So maybe the description of a PM, responsibilities, I think these were all scattered maybe. We really didn't have a dedicated area for that. So we have the 3rd chapter on that. I think these are some of the changes that has happened in the first 3 chapters. Let me quickly take you to the next, I think, major thing which I'm sure you'll be interested, as I said. The 10 knowledge area, 5 process group, that still remains. So these numbers have not changed. So let me explain you what has changed. So 5 process group name remains same. 10 knowledge area number remains same, but they have made some changes in the name of some of the knowledge area. For example, till 5th edition, this knowledge area used to be referred as project time management, but now they refer this as project schedule management. So I think the reason is they're saying that, hey, there is nothing, we really can't control time. So it's not about time management in a project context. It is more about project schedule management. So they have just renamed it. Rest all, I think the process names probably have remained more or less same. There is one more knowledge area where the name has changed. Earlier this knowledge area was referred as project human resource management. So now they call it as project resource management. because it's not just human resources, we also need physical resources, a lot of physical resources for managing a project. So we need machines, we need facilities, equipments, materials. So now they have addressed that, and they have added maybe a specific process also. So instead of calling, earlier this process was known as acquire project team. Now instead of calling that as acquire project team, they have renamed this to acquire resources. So where we have to acquire both manpower resources as well as physical resources. So this is, I think this is the change in the name of the knowledge area. One is schedule, other is resource. I think this is one broad change. Okay, now in terms of the processes, I think earlier it was 47 processes and now we have 49 processes. I think it's there in our main slide also, if I have to explain here. So earlier 47, now 49. So what they did, from 47, they dropped one process, so it became 46, and they've added three new processes. So when we say they have added 3 new processes, I think it's really not the world is changing, but then they're trying to make it look more complete and more relevant. For example, what are the three new processes they have added? Let me show you here. So they have added a process called control resources. If you see, we never had something called control resources till 5th edition of PMBOK. Now control resources is a process which focuses on monitoring and controlling the physical resources. So now they're trying to put this, earlier it was all implicit, even if there was no process, but then it was understood that we are doing it, but then nothing was mentioned explicitly. So now they are making it more explicit here in 6th edition. They have added one more process called implement risk responses. So this process name was not there again till 5th edition. So what they used to do, plan risk responses and then straight come to control risk. So control risk included implementing the risk responses and then monitoring their effectiveness. But here they have made a change. So implement risk responses and then monitor risk. They have also added one more process called manage project knowledge. So this is a new process they added. There was no explicit process for managing knowledge, because when we work in project, there are new knowledge we are creating, new lessons learned we are creating. So I think we always discuss about lessons learned, but then there was no specific process for this. So they have added one more process, because there's a lot of emphasis now on continuously managing new knowledge, continuously using existing knowledge. So that's the third process they have added. So 3 processes added, I think I showed you, and 1 process has been dropped. If you see procurement management here, so as part of procurement management, there was a process called close procurement. So explicit process, close procurement, now they have dropped it, and that closing activities maybe would be addressed somewhere as part of this process. So this is, I think, overall some structural changes they have made in the process, number of process and the naming of process. So there are some other changes in terms of naming also, what they have done. Let me show you. Yeah, I think we have covered all of it. Manage project knowledge, control resources, implement risk responses are the 3 new processes which got added newly, and close procurement process got dropped, and time management got renamed as project schedule management. Human resource management has been renamed as resource management to include both manpower and physical resources management. And some process names have been revised to make them appear more consistent with overall processes. So one more change is, earlier we had a process called perform quality assurance. This was part of quality management. Now this process has been renamed as manage quality. So the 3 processes in quality management would now look something like this. Plan quality management, same as earlier. Control quality, same as earlier, but then instead of saying perform quality assurance, they're saying manage quality, which is kind of an ongoing process of managing quality. So that's one change that has happened. Some more changes in the naming to make it more consistent, more meaningful. Yeah, so acquire project team has been renamed as acquire resources. And develop project team and manage project team, these were two other processes. They have been renamed as develop team and manage team, making it more shorter, more crisper. So this is one change in the name. Earlier we had a process called control communication. Now that has been renamed as monitor communication. The reason there is we really don't control communication. We monitor communication, how things are happening. So that's the thought process behind that. Control risk earlier has been renamed as monitor risk. So they're saying we are really not controlling risk, we are monitoring risk. I think that's a thought process here. We had a process called plan stakeholder management, which is part of stakeholder management knowledge area earlier. But then they renamed this to plan stakeholder engagement. And control stakeholder engagement has been renamed to monitor stakeholder engagement. Let me show you again in that process table what is the benefit of this. So if you see the stakeholder management knowledge area, and if you see these three processes, plan stakeholder engagement, manage stakeholder engagement, and monitor stakeholder engagement. So here the word engagement has been used now more consistently, because that is what we are trying to do. Earlier this process was named as plan stakeholder management. Now they are saying it's plan stakeholder engagement. Earlier this process was known as control stakeholder engagement. They are saying, hey, so we really don't control, we are monitoring, and then if required we take corrective action to kind of change them to the expected, to our expectation. So these are the changes that has happened. I think in terms of the processes, I think in terms of the number of processes, and in terms of some of the changes in the names of knowledge area, and also some changes in the names of the processes. I think at a broader level, I think this is one major, probably this gives us an idea. But then within each of the processes, I think what has changed is the input output tools and technique. The way they are aligned now, I think they are different than the way they're aligned in 5th edition. Now when I'm saying this, I think the basic understanding, internal understanding remains same, but since the names have changed, some of the name of inputs, a lot of input, output, tools, technique names have changed. So that is what again we need to understand, and things are maybe a little more rule based now in 6th edition. Yeah, I think I have really taken more time. I'll just take 2 minutes, maybe we might exceed. As I said, every knowledge area would have a frontal consistent material, what they call it as front material. So the front material for every knowledge area would have these bullet items. So what are some of the key concepts in this knowledge area? What are some of the trends and emerging practices? Earlier also they were talking about it, but now they are putting this in the front of the knowledge area. And tailoring is a very important thing, because a lot of time when we talk about this project management processes, if I'm working on a very small project versus I'm working on a very large project, I think the rigor, to what extent we apply these processes, I think there has to be some flexibility. So that is what is known as tailoring. So they are also kind of addressing the tailoring considerations consistently. We simply say that, hey, so you can take your call. Process has to be followed, but then to what extent it should be followed, you tailor it. The rigor, you tailor it. So you have that flexibility. And considerations for agile and adaptive environment. So in case your project would be using agile and adaptive, so do you need to take any consideration? But then this doesn't mean that you yourself have to become an agile expert. So you might have to refer to an agile expert, and then accordingly maybe you make your plan, develop your plan, etc. if agile is your underlying method. I think this is again broad level changes. I think I have explained you. Yeah, I think that here maybe I can stop from my side. Yeah. So let me just quickly summarize. I think the kind of changes what I explained you is like some changes in the overall process numbers and some renaming. That's one. And then the inputs, outputs, some rules, new rules that has come up. But a major change is the tools and technique. So some regrouping of tools have happened. And then those are kind of described in detail in the particular section in the PMBOK. But the whole idea here is to kind of make the all these processes appear more consistent, more rule-based, more logical. And then these are the changes that those have happened. And these are being explained by PMI. I'm seeing the questions here, so I'll try to quickly answer. I think this changes, these details would be shared with all of you. But then what I've given you is a broad understanding of the changes. So what we have maybe going forward, as I said, I think people who would have already taken training based on PMBOK Fifth Edition and who would have really kind of spent a lot of time understanding Fifth Edition. And then again, starting from scratch on Sixth Edition could really again become overwhelming. So I think based on this, we also have kind of a bridge course which is there, which is a very crisp bridge course, which kind of very quickly can take someone, I mean, who is conversant, comfortable with Fifth Edition, take very quickly in a day's time, maybe about 8 hours. It's a 2-day course that's there. So where like every process we go and try to understand the changes with relevant to whatever we just talked about today. So that's one. Exam pattern, the pattern remains same, 200 questions, 4 hours, but then the knowledge would be a little different now. Now the knowledge, the names, the process names, the tools, techniques, input, output, I think the exam would be based on the latest Sixth Edition. So I think if that was the question, so pattern, overall pattern, no, but the knowledge definitely has changed. And understanding the knowledge, I think from 5th to 6th would be key. Someone who is completely new to 6th, of course, I mean, someone like coming with a very clean slate, hey, so I want to just start now. Then one can start reading 6th edition. But then somebody who has already kind of spent a lot of time in 5th edition, I think with a very minimal effort, we can understand all the changes thoroughly in detail of all the 49 processes, what exactly has changed 5th to 6th process wise. I think that would really kind of give a very quick momentum to someone who is already conversant. Yeah, and the other thing, hard copy, soft copy, I think it really it really depends. Some people comfortable with soft copy, some people think they feel more comfortable with hard copy. I think the way I would respond to that would be, it really depends on your choice. So what you feel more comfortable, because both the copies are available. So that would be there. There would actually be no questions on Agile, I think. Let me clarify. Agile, to the extent, what is Agile? Why Agile? Maybe that, I think to that extent. And then if you're using Agile method, maybe you may have to take some special consideration to prepare your project plan. So expectation definitely is not on someone becoming saying this. See, Agile is more popular in software, and that is where it is as on today. But if I talk about a construction project manager who is like, who are making all these highways and all, so PMBOK is applicable to them also. So expecting them to become a guru in Agile, I personally think that's not the expectation. And then PMI is very clear on that. What is Agile and why Agile? And if you're using Agile, you might have to take some special consideration in your planning, in your execution, which can come. Those inputs would come from an Agile Scrum Master. So maybe to that extent, I think Agile should be addressed. Okay, I hope, as I said, I think maybe we are not, I'm the only person who is speaking. You guys are writing here on the chat box. But the assumption here was like this session was more for people who are already conversant with PMBOK Fifth Edition to some extent. And then I'm sure a lot of questions start coming in. So, hey, how much effort I have to put in? So that's where I think this bridge course is there, which can really kind of quickly take you to all the understanding from 5th to 6th edition. But what I gave you, I think it's all based on that. I think in this webinar, short time, I have explained the structural changes that has happened. And then in the course, maybe you see all the details. And then, yeah. No, question distribution pattern still remains same. That has not changed. So till 2015, that was the last time. Whatever was there, it still is intact. So your number of questions in project initiation, project planning, execution, monitoring, and closing, same. That has not changed. But the knowledge has changed. So because the process descriptions have changed. So that is the only thing you have to take care of. Great. I hope it has helped you guys to kind of at least understand, because anything understanding maybe from a top-down approach definitely helps rather than kind of, I'm sure it's like a lost feeling. Going through PMBOK is not easy. But then trying to kind of look at it more on a rule-based definitely helps. Okay, I can take any other questions. Okay, slide 11 maybe. This was a little more. I think, remember we talked about this tools and technique, data gathering, data analysis, data representation technique, decision making technique. So these are some groups which are being created. So this slide says under each group how many specific tools and technique are there. For example, data gathering, there are 9 data gathering tools and technique. And so while you'd see data gathering as a tool and technique in many processes, but then you would be seeing one of these 9 again in the description section. Data analysis, there are 27 different kinds of data analysis. I think this was there in 5th edition, so randomly being put in the process tool technique name. But now they are putting as data analysis and then the respective data analysis for that. I think this slide talks about that. Overall, I think, so these are the groups, interpersonal and team skills. So this is a group of tool and technique, which again includes 17 interpersonal team skills. What you see is the generic one in the process table, but then in the description again we see which specific interpersonal skill. And there are 60 ungrouped tools and technique. So I think this is again one summary you can see. Okay, thank you so much. I thank all of you for your patience, for participating, coming, listening to me, listening to us.